Hi everyone, good to see you all again. I know it's been a little while, but I'm back. Maybe a month since I last made a video, but hey ho. I'm in my flat because it's super windy outside, so I didn't want to run the risk of getting nothing but wind sounds on the microphone, so here we are. So today we're talking headcanon trans stories or metaphors or analogies. By headcanon, what I mean are stories which aren't necessarily overtly or even probably intended to be trans stories, but I've twisted them inside my own head to be so. Why am I making this video today? Well, first of all, I think it's just kind of fun and silly. I understand that everything that I'm going to be saying in this video is probably completely inside my own head, but that's perfectly fine. But also, what I want to do is to point out that there are some elements of the trans experience, at least my trans experience, that I think are pretty much a universal part of the human experience in general, and so maybe this might help people's understanding of us. Also, maybe I'm curious to see if you will agree with me as well, so I look forward to seeing the discussion and disagreements in the comments section below. It's kind of fun to have these headcanon ideas because in the first place, there just aren't that many trans stories out there. Looking around for specifically overtly trans stories, there just isn't that many for us to kind of cling to, and so we kind of have to use our imagination sometimes to try to find stories which resonate with us as trans people. And also, I really love discussing and dissecting media, so this is going to be a video where I get to kind of geek out a little bit and really let my inner lunatic, I guess, wave her flag in front of an audience. There are a few famous, or maybe better known, examples of trans headcanon stories, such as Mulan, which I've not actually seen, but I understand many trans men have kind of latched onto as an example of something that's representative of their experience. And also a lot of people see Gwen from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse as a kind of a trans icon, and that her story has taken on a bit of a trans headcanon kind of direction. But I want to talk about a film that I saw last night, Desperately Seeking Susan. Now, Desperately Seeking Susan is a film that was released in 1985 and stars Rosanna Arquette as Roberta,
and Madonna as Susan.
Now, in this film, Roberta, which is just fantastically named, she starts off apparently as a symbol of everything that's to be aspired to, at least in the mid to early 1980s. She's married to a successful and apparently popular man. She lives in a modern house full of all sorts of gadgets and goes to glamorous parties where everyone wears the same dresses. She's also kind of unsure of herself and seems reluctant to stand out in any meaningful way. She's also always been secretly obsessed with a woman called Susan, who she only knows about from cryptic messages in the personals column of the newspaper. She seems drawn to the romance of the relationship between two people that she's never met. But maybe there's something a little bit more to that. After meeting Roberta, we are introduced to Susan herself, and we learn that she's almost everything that Roberta is not. Susan is wild, aka sexually confident, charismatic, knows what she wants and how to get it. She wears really unique clothing, and she has a very unstable and unpredictable life. She basically lives out of a suitcase with no fixed home, living off her many friends and boyfriends. One day, Roberta decides to see Susan meet the desperate seeker and basically stalks her through 1980s New York. Through a series of misunderstandings, she gets knocked unconscious, gets amnesia, and is given the chance to live the life of Susan. We understand that Roberta has never really been happy in that life she'd had before and has always been drawn to a very different way of living, one of excitement, adventure, passion, and mediocre stage magic. So by the end of the film, when Roberta has her memory back, we're not surprised to learn that she leaves her life of bland dissatisfaction. This was a life that she could have stayed in. Her husband gave her a way back to her life of housewifedom. But she decides to reject that She leaves a life where things were certain and stable and, I guess, predictable and boring, to a life which was a little bit more chaotic and where her future is much less certain. But what is important, that life that she chooses is much closer to the life of who she actually is. Now, this is not an especially unique plot. There's lots of films which follow this kind of hero is unhappy, learns how to let go of their hang-ups, embraces their true inner self, finds genuine happiness, even if it goes against the grain type stories. I'm sure you can think of many of these just off the top of your head. But that's also my point. The trans story, or at least my trans story, is rather similar. So let's break this story down a little bit more, just so that I can kind of make some clear parallels between Desperately Seeking Susan and my own journey thus far. So at the start of the film, as I said, Roberta begins and she's living a life which society is telling her she should be happy with. And this is absolutely true for me as well. If you were to take a look at my life pre-transition, you might think that I should have had every right to be fairly happy with this. I had a good job, a stable relationship, I have friends, I was respected within my profession, I had a decent income, I'm living in a place where I'm reasonably happy. Objectively, things should be okay. You could have looked at me and said, well, there's a person who's got their stuff together, they know what they're doing, they are fine. But actually, Roberta, in the movie, she's unhappy. But perhaps at the start of the film, she really struggles to kind of identify or say why that unhappiness is. And although by the time I'd started transitioning, I was fairly confident I knew why I wasn't happy living as pretending to be a man, there were long periods of my life where I had this existential unhappiness, and it was really hard for me to pinpoint what that was until I was able to get a real sense or a vocabulary for being trans and what that meant and why all of these different things were causing me dissatisfaction and unhappiness. All I knew that I was unhappy and unsatisfied with my life at that point. But then, as Roberta begins to experience and sample the life of Susan, she learns that these are some of the reasons why she was unhappy. She needs these things in her life. She needs to make this change, this transition, so to speak, from one life to the other in order for her to feel fulfilled and happy and satisfied in her life. Another thing about Desperately Seeking Susan is Roberta is obsessed with someone who is living the life that she secretly desires. And that's absolutely true as well. I can't say that I was necessarily obsessed with trans people and their lives, but I was very, very jealous, very obsessed with women going about their day, living their life, in my view, from my perspective, freely and without the same kind of anxieties and stresses that I was living with there and then. I would be watching women as they go about their day, and I know that sounds super creepy and horrible, but bear with me. So I would be sort of thinking about how much that appeals to me, not necessarily that individual woman and her individual life, but that life in general, where I can get up, I can wear the clothes that I want, I can look the way that I want to a certain extent, and I can just go into the world presenting as myself without wearing a mask anymore. And that's what I saw when I would see other women. It wasn't necessarily that specific woman that I found appealing. It was that idea of womanhood and femininity that I was, I guess, somewhat obsessed with. So when Roberta tries out and samples her desired life, the life of Susan, the people who represent society, that is the husband and the husband's sister, they don't understand at all. In fact, they think that she's actually secretly a criminal, or even worse, homosexual. They say that she's a lesbian, in fact, a lesbian prostitute. And this is the only way that they can square away the fact that she wants to reject that life of apparent perfection. They don't understand how somebody can not find that world appealing, and in fact, they label her a snake and a criminal. someone who is outside of society or civilization. And that is absolutely true. I mean, you'll find so many people completely misunderstanding or not understanding the trans experience, and we are labelled quite broadly as degenerates, outcasts, criminals, all these negative things, just because we want to live a life that's more aligned and closer to the one that we need to live, the life that is ours. I think if nothing else in this film represents the kind of the broader trans experience, it's that complete misunderstanding of why somebody would not want to take the accepted or acceptable societal pathway, and by rejecting that, you are labelled as some kind of less than person. That's absolutely what we see across the entire media narrative about us trans people. By taking on her new life, Roberta attracts a lot more attention. And I think that's probably true. As a visible trans woman, I probably get more stares and looks than I did when I was presenting as a cis man, but that's just because I feel I look so good, just like Roberta did in the film. Also, by taking on the new life of Susan, Roberta finds her relationships are much more authentic. This is probably one of the things that help Roberta feel at home or comfortable in her new life as Susan. And I think that's definitely true for me as well. I have as many, I guess, connections now, or maybe even more connections now as I did then, but I have to say my relationships with basically everybody are so much more fulfilling and so much more real now that I don't have to pretend who I am, because I'm so honest with everybody now. I have a much deeper connection with almost everybody that I meet, and that is so nice, which is an understatement, I suppose. And another thing that I noticed when Roberta made that sort of transition to Susan, it seemed like it was almost seamless. She has this kind of romantic interest as not Susan, I guess you could call it, and he describes her in ways which would have been completely unrecognizable pre-Susan transition. It's almost like this is the life that she's always been meant to live. And by taking on that role, by shedding the expected roles that she'd taken on as early film Roberta, she was able to live a life that was so much freer, so much more herself. And so it didn't feel like there was any real tension when she was taking on the role of Susan. It felt like she'd always been born to be a Susan kind of character. So it's obvious that the life that she ends up living at the end of the film is so much more a perfect fit for her than it was the life at the start of the film. And again, I think that's really, really key to why I see this film as something of a trans metaphor, because that's how I feel about my own experiences. I thought that I would find this whole transitional journey of mine so much harder, but actually being myself and being a woman is just easier, because I don't have to pretend, I don't have to put on a front, I don't have to lie to people about who I am. It means that when I step out of the door, every time I meet somebody, I'm meeting them completely transparently. There is no hiding that, and that's really easy to do, I have to say. Also, as I've kind of mentioned already, she just looks so much better in her new life. Her fashion choices are just so much more unique and herself and on point, and I have to say that for me, I've said this before, I feel I look so much better now than I have ever done in my life. And I think at the end of the film, even though her future is much less certain, you know, we can't say for sure that she's going to stay with the man that she's with right at the end of the film, not her husband, some other guy. She's not going to necessarily stay as a magician's assistant for the rest of her life. There's probably going to be some turmoil, there's probably going to be some tension, there's probably going to be some challenges that she has to face. We, the audience, are so confident that she's made the right choice for herself. we can see through that process of her coming to terms with who she really is and embracing and accepting and stepping into that life, she's become the person that she always should have been. She's so much more alive, she's glowing, she's happy, she's in a place where she knows who she is. And that is so much a trans story. I couldn't have put it better if I'd written that story myself. And these are some of the reasons why I think Desperately Seeking Susan is secretly a trans metaphor or analogy. I think most of you who know this film will probably turn around in the comments and say, Abby, what on earth are you talking about? It's just a silly film from the 80s starring Madonna. It's not that deep. But hopefully you've heard me out and you can understand where I'm coming from. As I said at the top of this video, I wanted to make this and I wanted to talk through my thoughts, not necessarily because I am completely committed to this idea and I think that this is 100% accurate and that there is that I can't hear any criticisms of this theory that I have about Desperately Seeking Susan is actually a trans story. What I wanted to point out was that there are so many parallels between these so-called, I guess, coming of age style stories where people make this kind of journey going from a place where they shouldn't be, I suppose, to a place where they will absolutely thrive. That is central to our story. And I think even if you don't fully understand every part and facet of a trans story or the trans experience, I think most people can probably understand that basic thing, for want of a better way of putting it. Okay, I'll leave it there. Anyway, I'm curious to see if this triggers any discussion and conversation in the comments section below. Oftentimes, I do have a really thriving discussion down in that section, so I'm hoping that we'll get some of that today. I just wanted also to end with a quick life, I guess, update, because it's been about a month since I last made and released the videos, so perhaps some of you might be a little bit curious. It's been a really busy month for me. My work has been super busy because we've been somewhat short-handed, and so I've had to take on the work of 2 people just as myself, which is a lot. It was my birthday a couple of weeks ago, so that's why I'm wearing this dress, because this is a gift that somebody gave to me, as is this lipstick as well. So I feel super loved and happy with the gifts and wishes that I got for my birthday as well. That was really good. Although it's not obviously brilliant to be another year older, but whatever, we can never stop the march of time, I suppose. I get ever closer to my much looked forward to trip to London. That's in just 5 or 6 weeks time now. It's getting really super close and I'm really excited, but with that excitement comes a little bit of nerves and anxiety because of what's going on in the world. I don't know if it's going to be impacted by that. I hope not. It still feels like all systems are go from the side of the school that I'll be working for, so fingers crossed. We'll see. Anyway, so I hope that you're all good. I know that I haven't seen you for a while, but I'd love to hear what's been going on in your lives from my regular audience, so please do drop me a message to tell me how things have been with you. And I look forward to seeing you all again very soon. I do hope to make another video in less time than a month, let's put it that way. Alright, take care, all the best, and I'll see you all soon. Bye bye.